Graduates would start work in August. After 2 years, they could stay in the prison service or leave.
Graduates will want speedy promotion in this, otherwise they're probably not going to hang about. They're going to be off after 18 months.
324 inmates died in the year to September, the highest number on record. Justice Secretary Liz Truss supports the scheme as prison officers say they need an extra 8,000 staff to tackle increasing violence.
Recent violence in Bedford jail is the category of prison which new recruits will work in. But when trouble breaks out, can graduates really be guards?
We don't ask prison officers to cope with riots. What we're saying is that becoming a prison officer is an incredibly rewarding career. It can be challenging. I don't think we'll ever pretend that being a prison officer is an easy role.
But soaring violence and job cuts mean many staff are already feeling the pressure. And unions fear competition from graduates will only make that worse.
What that kind of says to all the staff that are currently working in prisons that have worked extremely hard trying to keep a lid on the serious incidents that have been going on for the last few years is you're not good enough.
I remember having to mature so quickly, understanding that the world around me was no playground because people were being shut down.
Cider knows 45 graduates can't solve the deep-rooted problems in the prison system, but if she gets the job, she hopes she can be part of the solution.
Bedford found it to be overcrowded, understaffed and unsafe. A report said officers struggled with unlocking inmates from cells, and that incidents of prisoner self-harm had almost doubled in the previous 6 months, from 67 to 121. The Chief Inspector of Prisons wrote, "Prisoners told us it was easier to get illegal drugs than it was to get clothes."
The challenges inside jails like Bedford explain in some way why so many officers are leaving. With drug abuse and violence on the rise, one officer here told me that because of staff shortages, he no longer felt safe and was looking for a new job.
The government has promised an extra 2,500 officers, but the Prison Officers Association wants guarantees on safety and recruitment, and without them is threatening to walk out of jails.
For prison officers to strike, it's illegal and surely incredibly irresponsible.
No, not at all. When you're talking about people's safety and their lives that are at risk, then, you know, if there's a need to take strike action, then we fundamentally believe we need to do that to protect our members and prisoners.
But more prison staff are promised. The challenge is keeping hold of them and keeping our jails safe for both officers and inmates. Thomas.
An inquiry is underway into how prisoners damaged cells and offices during a 6-hour rampage at Lewes Prison in East Sussex. Yesterday's disturbance was finally brought under control when a national response unit was dispatched to the scene. John Ryle has more.
Staff on the jail's C wing had to retreat to safety as prisoners went on the rampage for some 6 hours. Visits to the prison were cancelled during what was described as a serious ongoing incident. Offices and cells were damaged, but there are no reported casualties. The Prison Officers Association says severe staffing shortage was to blame for the loss of control.
We need to be in control, that make sure prisoners are safe and prison staff are safe at the same time, and that requires someone to be in control and managing and ensuring things like this don't happen. So when control's lost like that, it's a big concern to our members, makes our members very fearful about how they can conduct their job appropriately, but it also raises some wider concerns about the lack of discipline and control within prisons, which leads to the flood of drugs, mobile phones and weapons that we're seeing in prisons at the moment.
In a statement, the Ministry of Justice says a specially trained national response unit was brought in to restore order, and that the prisoners who took part in this riot face significantly longer behind bars.
HMP Swaleside on the Isle of Sheppey for us tonight. So, Sarah, what can you tell us about what's going on inside there?
Well, just in the past half hour, we've seen specialist trained guards enter the prison in an attempt to try and control what is happening on Wing A. At the moment, 60 prisoners have control of that wing, and the prison guards are totally at a loss in terms of trying to control the situation. So reinforcements have had to be sent in, and this is an incident that has been going on for several hours now. And it also comes, of course, just 6 days after we saw a major riot happen in HMP Birmingham. And it's now the 5th incident that we've seen in prisons across the country in the space of 2 months. All of this has led to the Prison Officers Association saying that they're really concerned about the situation in our prisons. Here's what Mike Rolfe had to say, chairman of the Prison Officers Association, to Sky News earlier.
Well, this has been an issue for a while now. We've been warning since 2010 that if you take too much out of the system, you're going to cause these problems. And what we've seen is a slow drip effect where prisoners become in charge of prisons, basically. And it's not the position we ever wanted. We've cut frontline staff too much. We've removed people's pensions rights.
So an ongoing dispute between the government and the Prison Officers Association, but there were warnings about this prison. Back in July there was an inspection where it was described as not safe, where there was descriptions of high levels of violence, but it seems that tonight at least the prison officers are unable to control the situation that's happening on Wing A.
Tara, thank you. To Syria.
Hello and a very good evening. Prison staff were forced to retreat to safety when inmates went on the rampage at an East Sussex jail. Cells and offices were damaged in the disorder at Lewes Prison yesterday afternoon. The disturbance was brought to an end by a national response unit. The Ministry of Justice says the prison is now secure, but the Prison Officers Association plans to take action nationally this week to highlight concerns about safety in prisons. Mark Norman reports.
Just after 7 a.m, prison officers gathered outside Lewes Prison while specialist officers entered the jail. They were there to restore order after what was described as a serious disturbance, which apparently began when staff tried to put prisoners back into their cells.
Those prisoners refused to go away and started off violence and refractory behaviour towards staff. Staff felt under fear, so they retreated to a place of safety, and then once the wing was evacuated of staff, the prisoners went on the rampage and started to destroy offices and furniture, and some prisoners that were locked behind their cells started to destroy OBS panels and damage their cells as well.
Over the last 2 years, safety concerns about Lewes Prison have been raised by both prisoners and prison staff.
I've never ever known Lewes Prison to be rocky, but it's something is going to go.
The causes of yesterday's violence are not yet known. The prison will be on a restricted regime today. Prisoners' families have already been on social media saying their visits have been cancelled, and you can see the contractors' vehicles behind me brought in, I'm told, to move prisoners involved in the incident to other prisons around the UK. The Ministry of Justice told us that prisoners involved would be punished. On Wednesday of this week, the Prison Officers Association will take action across the country to highlight their concerns about safety in UK jails. Mark Norman, BBC South East Today.
Mobile phones smuggled into his jail cell in Kent to manage a gang who supplied more than 40 guns to underworld figures has been given a 12-year sentence. Ishmael Brown was serving 9 years for kidnap at Rochester Prison, but directing the making and sale of weapons, including handguns and AK-47 style assault rifles, to criminals outside. Sarah Smith reports.
Gang member Aaron Murray brandishing an assault rifle, one of more than 40 firearms heading back into criminal hands. The gang's method: to take deactivated weapons and reactivate them. Metalworker and former soldier in the Polish army, Bart Pulowski, providing the necessary skills. The gang carrying out the work may have been based in East London, but the linchpin of the operation was behind these fences at Her Majesty's Prison in Rochester. From his cell in here, Ishmael Brown sourced the guns and then organised for them to be sold on to the criminal underworld. Serving a 9-year sentence for kidnapping, Brown had an accomplice inside Rochester Prison, teenage drug dealer Esen Abdul Razak. They used contraband mobile phones smuggled into their cells to do the deals. It's a case, says the Prison Officers Association, which highlights an ongoing problem.
We're not surprised at all. There's lots of mobile phones in prisons. We've been pressing the MOJ for a long time now to increase the number of operational staff so that we can deal with the mobile phones, or in fact bring in mobile blockers to stop the use of mobile phones within prisons.
Brown's girlfriend Caitlin Adams' job was to collect the guns her boyfriend sourced and deliver them to the workshop. The gang added to their profits by selling ammunition they'd made themselves.
The lengths of sentences really demonstrate how serious the court have taken these offences. this criminal network that has been involved in the manufacture and supply of firearms could have caused massive potential harm to the capital and the people.
With mobile phones banned in prison, any inmate would face punishment if caught with one. Using one to dealing guns has seen Abdul Razak given an extra 5-year sentence and ringleader Brown another 12. Sarah.
Accusations this evening that it's lost control of the country's prisons. Earlier on this week, 10,000 prison officers went on strike over concerns about violence and staff shortages, saying the system is in meltdown. And today there was more bad news for ministers, as our political editor Andy Bell explains.
Is this the reality of Britain's prisons? It's claimed these pictures on social media show prisoners posing in Guy's Marsh prison in Dorset, with drugs apparently on show here and the message "Party night tonight." It's another embarrassment for the government in a week when prison officers staged what they called a protest action over cuts to staff numbers, cuts which they say are putting their members at risk. Today, their union representatives have been meeting the Justice Secretary.
I've never ever known it in such a dire position where staff morale is so low, where prisoners are bullying and fighting amongst themselves and assaulting staff and feeling effectively in control so they can run their own environments within that within a prison environment.
So
and that's
your members have lost control of some prisons, you feel?
Not through their own design, through the lack of support they've had through government.
The government's promised to recruit another 2,500 prison officers, but the relationship's clearly strained after the Justice Secretary described this week's action as an illegal strike.
They have called unlawful industrial action, which I was not happy about. That's why we took them to court. Prison officers have now come back to work. I'm pleased to see that. I go around prisons a lot. I meet some fantastic people. They have my full support and full backing. And what I want to do is work with them to make our prisons better.
It's not just the prison officers who say the tension behind bars is rising fast. Charities too say cuts to staff numbers combined with current prisoner levels mean further tragedy is likely.
I really do worry that we will see a situation where a staff member may be killed. We've had murders of prisoners by prisoners. I don't think we're that far away, sadly, from a situation where prison staff lose control of a wing of a prison or an entire prison and a staff member's life is put at risk.
Both sides in this want to avoid that, but each expects the other to play its part. Andy Bell.
Very much indeed.
Downing Street has tonight condemned as totally unacceptable photographs published in a newspaper of inmates enjoying luxury meals and other illicit perks inside jail.
Yes, it came as prison officers met the Justice Secretary over their fears that prisons in England and Wales are in meltdown following a surge in violence by inmates. More from our political correspondent, Libby Wiener.
What exactly drove prison officers to walk off the job this week? They say it was escalating violence fuelled by widespread drug taking in the country's jails. And today, photos posted from this Dorset prison seem to support their claims. Inmates with large quantities of drugs and partying without any supervision. Number 10 condemned their activities. The Justice Secretary admitting problems are widespread.
We do have a very serious situation in our prisons with high levels of violence. We're already working on recruiting new officers, dealing with the problems of drugs, phones and drones. We've already taken action. And in fact, we've got new officer recruits coming through.
But after Tuesday's walkout, it seems the Prime Minister was determined that industrial action had to stop. Talks between the Prison Officers Union and the Justice Secretary apparently leading to a breakthrough.
We believe that she has spoken to the Prime Minister and obviously got some mandate to be able to work with us and achieve what she needs to do to make prisons safe and to make prison officers feel valued.
And that would mean more officers?
Well, she's already committed to those additional 2,500. We need to turn around the numbers of prison officers that are leaving.
Outbreaks of violence, such as this riot at Bedford Jail earlier this month, have put health and safety centre stage. The Chief Inspector of Prisons admitting staff and inmates are increasingly at risk.
Many prisons have become unacceptably violent and dangerous, and when they're in that condition, they can't fulfil their very important role of rehabilitation and resettlement.
Just 2 days ago, the Justice Secretary Liz Truss denounced the Prison Officers Association for taking what she called illegal strike action. Now she appears to have had a change of heart, offering real concessions on health and safety that will enable talks to begin again next week. Libby Vina, ITV News at the Ministry.
Served time in jails in Kent and Sussex claims that there's a regime of chaos and violence that's fuelled by inmates getting easy access to so-called legal highs. Dan Rolfe, who spent more than 27 years in prisons in Rochester and Lewis, says that significant numbers of inmates are addicted to substances such as spice.
Well, his revelations come as the Chief Inspector of Prisons said legal highs are leading to increased violence and deaths in prisons, with Kent institutions seeing a dramatic increase in the number of prisoners using legal highs. Fiona Irving reports.
It's being called an epidemic and is causing mayhem in prisons in Kent. Former addict Dan Rolfe spent 27 years in prison in Rochester and Lewis. He says he smoked the legal high spice all day, every day.
I've never known it so easy to get a drug in prison, and I've spent a lot of time in prison. Within 20 minutes of actually stepping foot in reception, I had drugs.
Undetected by urine tests, Dan estimates that half of his fellow inmates were using spice.
Certainly the problem is increasing over the last 12 months, and we're also seeing more what we call high-risk incidents. So these are either violent incidents in the prisons or they're health-related problems of people using spice.
Wrapped says over a period of 3 months in 2014, in 6 prisons in Kent, 20 inmates had been reported using new psychoactive substances like spice. In the same period this year, this had increased more than 12 times to 251 prisoners. And prison seizures of spice increased from 15 in 2010 to 737 in 2014.
In the Kent prisons, we've had a recent suicide at one of the Kent prisons, which we believe was associated to the use of MPS. We're having regular hospital escorts coming out of the Kent prisons that are having to go to the local hospitals. So that's putting added pressure on not only those hospitals but on the prison resource as well.
NPS, or new psychoactive substances like spice, is smuggled into prisons by inmates and visitors and thrown over the prison walls. And it's leading to an increase in violence inside.
Well, you know, I've seen people's hands slammed in doors over a £20 drug debt. You know, it's ruthless. You know, it's the new heroin, you know.
The prison service says it takes a zero-tolerance approach to drugs in prison and says those who are caught smuggling drugs like spice in face up to 2 years behind bars.
Go off air. Matt.
Now then, another prison riot, another inquiry. The latest disturbance, the 5th incident in an English jail in the last 2 months, came at HMP Swaleside on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. Around 60 inmates took control of part of a wing, and riot-trained tornado squads were once again deployed to restore order. How rotten is the state of our prisons? Paul McNamara reports.
It's becoming a familiar sight across the country. Reinforcements striding into a prison out of control. Last night it was HMP Swaleside on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent in need of backup. 60 inmates running riot on one landing of this 8-wing Category B prison. And familiar too now, the scenes apparently from inside the eye of the storm, filmed by a prisoner himself on a mobile phone he shouldn't have.
No face, no case, no face, no case.
This all started at 7 p.m. last night, but warning signs have been there for months. An HM inspectorate report in July called the prison dangerous, said levels of violence were too high, and said staffing issues meant there were troubles running a purposeful regime. These lords of all they survey appear to agree. By 1 a.m. this morning, the riot was over and the prisoners were back in their cells. But the problems facing the prison system extend far beyond one 5-hour skirmish here and whatever damage might have been caused. This is the 5th incident like this at an English prison in just under 2 months. So the question now is this a system in crisis? Before Swaleside, there was trouble at Lewis Prison in East Sussex in October. That was followed by disorder at Moorland in South Yorkshire and a riot at Bedford Prison where inmates took over 2 wings. And just last week, more than 200 inmates rioted at Birmingham Prison. The bill for that, around £2 million.
The worst case scenario is we fall into real heavy rioting around the estate. So if it was to go off at more than one jail at the same time, that would be very difficult to manage. So prisoners communicating via mobile phone, organising amongst themselves to create havoc in a few jails at once could really see the system in dire chaos.
Live footage, but man, a riot in HMP Birmingham, but
How have riots like this one in Birmingham last week become so prolific? Why are so-called tornado team riot squads so needed right now? Well, unions blame the cuts to prison officer numbers, the low pay and extreme overcrowding in jails. In the last 20 years alone, the prison population has nearly doubled to more than 85,000. Labour say it's time to stop sending so many to jail.
Politicians from across the aisle.
Good evening. The Ministry of Justice has confirmed the full extent of yesterday's 13-hour riot at Birmingham Prison, the worst in decades. 4 wings were badly damaged and 240 inmates have been transferred to other jails. The Prison Officers Association has told Sky News the same will happen elsewhere unless the government takes action. A warning Becky Johnson's report does contain some flash photography.
Even as prison vans queued up to remove 240 troublemakers from HMP Birmingham, claims the riot they caused was not only predicted but expected. Sky News has learnt conditions in this prison have reached breaking point. Nearly 3 dozen officers have recently quit. In their view, it was only a matter of time before prisoners took over, leading to 13 hours of chaos, inmates rampaging around this jail.
They've had over 30 staff leave over the last few weeks. It's a difficult place to work anyway, as you would imagine, but it's just been a slow deterioration since the cuts came as a result of privatisation, and they've really struggled to retain staff on the wages being offered, and it's caused this toxic mix that's led to this incident there.
Prisons lawyer Jan Arkwright visits inmates in HMP Birmingham several times each week.
They can be locked up for 23 hours a day. They can not necessarily get out of their cell. There's concerns about the quality of food. There's concerns about lockdown because there's issues going on elsewhere in the prison, so their doors are locked and they're not allowed out.
The riot here is the worst prison riot since Strangeways more than a quarter of a century ago. It took several teams of tornadoes, specially trained prison officers, backed up by riot police, to finally bring it to an end. While relative calm has been restored here in Birmingham, the problems that led to this riot are far from isolated to this one jail. Prison officers say cuts leading to a deterioration in conditions mean officers are quitting in large numbers. They're being replaced by less experienced staff who are far outnumbered by prisoners who are angry with how they're being treated. There have been several outbreaks of disorder even in the last 2 months. In October, a tornado team was sent to Lewes Jail in East Sussex after staff lost control of a wing in a serious disturbance. A week later in Bedford, the squad was sent in again and had to use stun grenades to regain 2 wings after more than 200 prisoners stole keys and broke into a medical store. Then, in late November, at Moorland Jail near Doncaster, the tornado riot team were deployed again to deal with dozens of rioting inmates. The man in charge of prisons admits there are serious issues in jails across the country.
The problems that we've got in the prison estate at the moment are in both public and private prisons. They reflect the fact that we've got many more prisoners who are more prone to serious violence, often gang-related violence. It reflects the fact that we've got a problem with psychoactive drugs, mamba, spice, that have been pushed into prisons and have changed the dynamic.
An investigation into the riot here is being carried out by G4S, who own this prison, and the Ministry of Justice. The Justice Secretary has promised prisoners involved will be punished, but tackling the issues that led to this violence will be a far more complex process.
Good evening. The Prison Officers Association is warning the government that it will take over control of the running of prisons unless ministers meet its demands to improve staffing numbers and safety. They say conditions in jails in England and Wales are like a bloodbath with increasing levels of violence. In an unprecedented move, the chair of the union says he is prepared to order strike action, which is illegal, and face prison himself. It comes as the government prepares to unveil its plans for prison reform tomorrow. Here's our special correspondent, Ed Thomas.
The pressure in our jails is building. In May, the BBC was given rare access to Wandsworth Prison.
Yeah, it's one person under restraint there. The wing looks secure.
To see life inside for staff and inmates. Like the convicted murderer in the middle of this, who told us a lack of staff meant increasing violence.
I've had murders in here, left, right and centre. And with the greatest respect, it's so short-staffed in here, this place can't run. It's unsafe. Even a lot of the staff that are in here are in fear.
And the stories here are shared in many jails. The latest figures show that over the past year there were 107 self-inflicted deaths. That's up by 13%. There were more than 23,000 assaults in our jails, up by 34%. And nearly 6,000 attacks on staff, an increase of 43% compared to the previous year.
My members are on their knees, they're absolutely of low morale.
This is the chair of the Prison Officers Association. Today he held talks with the Justice Secretary to demand change. And this is his only interview after that meeting.
If we don't get the answers we want over the next week of talks, next Friday we've given government an ultimatum, government and the employers an ultimatum. We will take control of prisons throughout England and Wales if necessary.
Taking control means prison officers abandoning the Ministry of Justice and their governors, only listening to union officials.
You don't hear from police officers saying they're going to do what they want on the streets. Or you don't hear from British soldiers saying, well, they're going to do what they want in a conflict. Why are you saying the same?
It's unprecedented, but we've been left in a position where it's a bloodbath in jails. Staff are being assaulted, 16 members of staff every single day. 49 prisoners a day. There's suicide that's totally uncontrollable, drug use, weapons, mobile phones. There's no security, there's no safety for anyone.
The Prison Officers Association has called for thousands of extra staff and increased security. If not, the chair says he'll call for a strike.
If absolutely necessary, it's illegal for us to do it, but we would take strike action. This is too serious a matter with people's lives, and I'll take that risk personally. And if I was to have my own funds seized or put in prison, that's a price worth paying.
You'll go to jail for that?
I would go to jail for my members over the levels of violence they're facing.
The government has already committed to prison reform and funding to recruit an extra 400 prison staff.
Many people recognise that there's a crisis inside our prisons. Are you using this situation to get more and more and more for your members?
Absolutely not. At the end of the day, this is people's lives. There's no excuse for leaving those people vulnerable to the violence and the squalid conditions that everyone's having to work and live in.
Tomorrow, the Justice Secretary will reveal plans to reform our prisons. But many say urgent action is needed now for both staff and inmates. Ed Thomas, BBC News.
More than what you can your own dinners. And you always know where the dinners are. But there's so much of it that you don't know where it's coming from there. There's a lot of fights going on where people are getting in debt for spice. People are feeling that they're having heart attacks on it. People are vomiting. They're passing through bowels, you know, and it's just so addictive. Once you've got it in you, you can't get it gone.
Well, let's talk now to Dan Rolfe, who's been in and out of prison for much of his adult life. In total, he's actually spent 27 years in jail and was released last December. He swapped crack cocaine and heroin inside for the legal high spice during his last prison sentence for commercial burglary. Also with us, Mike Rolfe, a prison officer who says spice is at pandemic proportions within jails, and the chief executive of Wrapped, Mike Trace. Welcome, all of you. Dan, let me start with you. Tell us about taking spice and how you got it when you were inside.
It literally came into my path the moment I walked into the prison. There's just so much of it in there that, you know, the people selling it are always looking for new customers because there's so much of it. I've never known it like it in prison.
It's coming in from outside, from what, visitors or people who work in various jails?
The majority of it gets thrown over the wall because it's so cheap to buy on the road.